how it's okay to say no. It's okay to have boundaries between you and other people when they want you to carry their knapsack, okay? Once you get those boundary lines set in a healthy way, you're gonna feel freer, you're gonna feel like you can breathe again, okay? You're gonna have the proper amount of weight on your shoulders. Hello, this is Lorraine, and welcome to Healthy Living, Spirit, Soul, and Body. So I am here in the back of my house, and it's kind of funny, but the woman that lives behind me put up a fence. Basically, she did it, you can see it right there. Basically, she did it because a lot of people didn't know where her property line was, and they were kind of infringing a little bit on her space. So she thought she'd put a fence up to let people know that this side is my property and that side is yours, okay? And I started thinking a little bit about boundaries. And, you know, a lot of people are talking about boundaries because, unfortunately, a lot of people are kept in a broken state, broken in their heart, broken in their emotions, because they've gotten confused about boundaries. And the funny thing is about boundaries is a boundary isn't necessarily a fence, it's a fence with a gate, okay? So the gate is to let good things in and keep bad things out. So I'm going to talk about 2 boundary laws that should help you not get confused, okay? So here we go. So a couple of things about boundaries. The basic definition of a boundary is a line that marks the limits of an area, a dividing line. So, and to get into our subject a little bit more, boundaries that we're talking about, it shows where one thing ends and another begins. They help each person figure out where one person ends and the other begins. Boundaries help you define what you are comfortable with and how you would like to be treated by others. And that really gives you an idea of boundaries and how we need to look at it in our lives. So let's talk about what are some issues with boundaries? What are some things that really trip people up? So I got a lot of my information from the famous book by Henry Cloud and John Townsend called Boundaries. And I'll be honest with you, Henry Cloud and John Townsend have unbelievable insight into this subject. One of the things that is the basis or the basis for confusion, okay, is that you have two different types of situations. Everyone has their own knapsack or their own responsibilities, and they need to be carrying that on their own. When they expect someone else to carry it, then that's where problems arise, okay? And the other way to look at it is if you have a person that has a boulder and they say, oh, no, I don't need any help, that's also not good either, because they do need help because they're in a crisis. So that's a good way of looking at and measuring the 2 different types of situations. You have to really go through the different people in your life and ask yourself, am I helping somebody carry their boulder, or am I carrying somebody else's responsibilities? And if you find yourself carrying somebody else's responsibilities, you have to set up a boundary. So I want to read you this illustration that they have in the Boundaries book that I thought was amazing. Okay, this is a father talking to a counselor about their son. They told the counselor that they wanted him to fix their son, Bill. When I asked where Bill was, they answered, oh, he didn't want to come. Why? Well, he doesn't think he has a problem, they replied. Maybe he's right, I said to their surprise. Tell me about it. They recited a history of problems that had begun at a very young age. Bill had never been quite up to snuff in their eyes. In recent years, he had exhibited problems with drugs and an inability to stay in school and find a career. It was apparent that they loved their son very much and were heartbroken over the way he was living. They had tried everything they knew to get him to change and live a responsible life, but all had failed. He was still using drugs, avoiding responsibility, and keeping questionable company. They told me that they had always given him everything he needed. He had plenty of money at school, so he wouldn't have to work. He had plenty of time for study and a social life. When he flunked out of school or stopped going to classes, they were more than happy to do everything they could to get him into another school where it might be better for him. After they had talked for a while, I responded, "I think your son is right. He doesn't have a problem." You could have mistaken their expression for a snapshot. They stared at me in disbelief for a full minute. Finally, the father said, "Did I hear you right? You think you don't think he has a problem?" "That's correct. He doesn't have a problem. You do. He can do pretty much whatever he wants, no problem. You pay, you fret, you worry, you plan, you exert energy to keep him going. He doesn't have a problem because you've taken it from him. Those things should be his problem, but now as it stands, they are yours. Would you like for me to help him to have some problems?" They looked at me like I was crazy, but some lights were beginning to go off in their heads. "What do you mean, help him have some problems?" "Well," I explained, "I think that the solution to this problem would be to clarify some boundaries so that his actions cause him to have the problems and not you." So you see how subtle that is. They really loved their son, but what they were doing was not really loving him. They were doing it out of guilt or whatever because they felt that he didn't live up to their standards. That could be, maybe they had too high standards. But the point is that they were reaping the results of what he was sowing. And he did not have a problem. They did, because they picked up all his problems. They picked up the reaping of all his problems. So what they needed to do was find ways now for him to reap the results of their problems. So that's just one of the laws of boundaries that we need to watch out for. We need to make sure that we are carrying our knapsack, we're being responsible. So once you'd be surprised that once you get those boundary lines set in a healthy way, you're going to feel freer, you're going to feel like you can breathe again, okay? You're going to have the proper amount of weight on your shoulders rather than carrying two people's weights, yours and the person whose responsibilities you're carrying. You can influence others, but you can't get them to change. You must change yourself. You must change yourself so their destructive patterns won't have any effect on you anymore. Change the way that you are dealing with them. They may be motivated to change when they see that their old ways aren't going to work anymore. Okay, a lot of times if you're in a relationship with someone who is abusive, okay, the best thing for you to do is create distance, because you can't change the other person, so you have to do what you can do to protect yourself. And in that kind of situation, they're not going to change on their own, so you need to create distance so you stay in a safe place. It's in the book, it says many times the only way to finally show the other person that your boundaries are real is to create space until they are ready to deal with the problem. Okay, and how true is that? Emotional distance is a temporary boundary to give your heart the space it needs to be safe. It is never a permanent way of living. People who have been in abusive relationships need to find a safe place to begin to thaw out emotionally. And I always call it detox, okay? Sometimes in abusive marriages, the abused spouse needs to keep emotional distance until the abusive partner begins to face his or her problems and become trustworthy. And unfortunately, a lot of times, the only way that's going to happen is if one of the spouses leaves and creates some physical space between them and the abusive spouse. And I think that that's very important. A lot of times people feel like if they want to keep the marriage alive, they need to stay with the abusive partner. And that is not true in the least. I think a lot of times people err on the other side and they stay longer than they should have. The bottom line is, if you're in a relationship with someone who has no intention of changing and is not reaping the consequences, as I mentioned earlier, of their bad behavior, and they're not going to change, then you need to do what you can do. You can't change them, but you can change yourself. And you need to leave and create a physical barrier. You need to create some physical space between you and that abusive partner until they decide to change their behavior. So this is a huge topic. This book, Henry Townsend, this book, Boundaries, is huge. But I just wanted to share just a few things that might really help you get a little bit more insight on your life. As I mentioned, it might not be a bad idea to think about all the people in your life and think about whether you are carrying the knapsack that they need to be carrying. Or are you carrying a boulder all by yourself when you need to ask for help? So just something to think about. But I hope you enjoyed this video today on boundaries. I hope it helped you a little bit and get you to look at your life a little bit and see where you might be taking on things that are not necessarily your responsibility, and how it's okay to say no. It's okay to have boundaries between you and other people when they want you to carry their knapsack, okay? If you did like this video, please give me a big thumbs up and subscribe and like. And as I always mention, the channel is called Healthy Living Spirit, Soul, and Body. My goal is to help you live a healthier life. So have a wonderful week, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye now.